to New Mexico's tax base. This area's economy includes hiking, recreation, and tourism because of the unique underground and above-ground caves and lakes. There are also farms, dairies, ranches, mining, and oil and gas operations in the area. Seepage of radiation from wind, rain, and other weather patterns into New Mexico products could reduce their value and affect tax revenues for state services. If communities with nuclear reactors want waste removed in order to do economic development, why would we want to import it into our state? This does not bode well for New Mexico. Fourth, the site is geologically unsuitable. The importing and storing of approximately 100,000 metric tons of high-level radiation does not appear to consider the presence of underground caves in the area. We already have sinkholes for mining of potash in this region. In addition, there is considerable presence of brine wells and seasonal brine lakes. The impact of brine on the storage containers as well as the weight of the nuclear cores are great safety concerns for me. The temporary site would likely become permanent. The Alliance for Environmental Strategies asks New Mexicans to support the coalition to halt Holtec and to oppose the licensing and funding of this proposed consolidated storage facility. I live 35 miles from Holtec's proposed site for storing the high-level nuclear cores and 5 miles from Waste Control Specialist site that imports low-level radiation waste into Texas and also wants to store high-level waste. I believe this affects the safety of my family, my children, and my grandchildren. There is no remedy for radiation. Keep New Mexico the land of enchantment. Stop Holtec from making New Mexico the land of radiation. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Noel V. Marquez. Noel is a resident of southeastern New Mexico. He is an artist, and he is a father. He is coming to us from Lake Arthur, New Mexico, Eddy County. So I'd like to welcome Noel up here to give his statement.
Thank you. I want to assure the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the rest of the state and country that Southeast New Mexico does not want to be the world's largest nuclear waste dump. Residents oppose bringing nuclear waste to New Mexico, which will threaten our economy, our health, and our democracy. Our local citizens are not being taught about the known dangers of radiation, the threat to our local economy, and the failed history of nuclear dumps across the country and this state. Rather, dump pushers are making unsubstantiated, misguided claims about jobs and short-term economic gains that have never panned out at other nuclear waste sites. We are having to research and learn on our own about the long-term consequences of this deadly, toxic business. The rush is on by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to grant Holtec a license before the people realize we are being sacrificed for another government nuclear experiment. The majority of our 60% Hispanic population have not been informed about how long-term ionizing radiation could affect future generations for thousands of years. The NRC has yet to do an honest environmental impact study to access real options and impacts and properly engage the public in a democratic process. We are being targeted for this environmental injustice. Even worse, the Holtec supposedly temporary storage site would likely become permanent, even though it is not designed for that because there is no final repository and more waste is being made every day by nuclear power. Radiation knows no borders, as we saw at the breach at WIP on February 14th of 2014. The Holtec canisters are thinly designed for bigger profits and transportability, which are already causing problems at the San Onofre nuclear reactor site in California. They will only get worse should they be brought here to New Mexico. This is just one of many issues and problems with the proposed Holtec Elia, New Mexico dump. The few dump promoters who would personally profit are misusing patriotism and making the unsupported claim that the dump will serve the greater good of society. If only we will sacrifice our health and livelihoods, and we will not. They've tried to discredit the informed community. The nuclear dump promoters use misleading information and omission of facts to calm the public into passivity. These nuclear profiteers are the fronts for the nuclear industry and do not represent us as a community of concerned citizens. We are nearly 60% Hispanic population communities, and we are being disregarded and given up as a sacrifice zone, not only by our area elected officials, but also Governor Martinez and Congressman Pierce, who failed us. They are now gone after the damage. Hopefully, the new elected officials will do better. We are here to communicate what is at stake, not only for the people of Eddy County, but the whole of New Mexico and the surrounding regions of Texas and Mexico. We already have 10 radioactive dumps in our state, threatening and affecting the health of our future generations. The gods of profit and production are never satisfied. We need to put a stop to it once and for all future life. The authorities of science want to control nature, but the truth is we are part of nature and we are not separate. It's up to us to protect our home. We will work to do so until we succeed, and we ask all New Mexicans to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. So I just want to back up a little bit. We're all here today specifically to talk about Holtec, and we just heard from two local community members, both a part of the Alliance for Environmental Strategies, or APHIS, and they are here today as representatives of the entire state of New Mexico. We as New Mexicans, we have to live with this dump if it is ever built, and we've already been experiencing a lot of health problems and a lot of issues with not having the past uranium mines cleaned up. We have so many issues besides this one dump. And so as community members, we're here today to talk about this issue with you, and we'll be happy to engage in more interviews after the rest of the speakers. I just wanted to further introduce myself. As an indigenous person, I come from the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo Nation has been dealing with a lot of the uranium mining problems. In your press packet, you will see a list of all of the communities that have passed resolutions against these proposals. And that does include local communities to the site, communities of the Navajo Nation, and Texas. And so now we're going to move into our talks from the speakers who have come a long way to be with us here today, our representatives who are our attorneys, our friends, and the representing counsel for each of the opposing interveners for the hearing, which is going to start tomorrow. So tomorrow is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission Atomic Safety and Licensing Board pre-hearing. So we will be here again tomorrow, and if needed, Thursday as well. Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Diane Curran with the Harmon, Curran, Spielberg, and Eisenberg Law Center, and she is representing Beyond Nuclear, based out of Washington, D.C. So thank you, Diane.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Diane Curran. I am a lawyer in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm here today representing Beyond Nuclear along with Mindy Goldstein and Carolyn Reisner from the Turner Environmental Law Clinic in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'd like to talk a little bit this afternoon about why the kind of legal reasons why this facility, as it's being called, is likely to turn into a waste dump, because there are real legal reasons for it. But first, to just give you a little background information about Beyond Nuclear. Beyond Nuclear is a national organization that has members all across the United States, including members who live very close or work or travel or ranch very close to the Holtec facility. They're close to the facility itself. They're also close to the railroad tracks and the roads and the railroad yards where 173,000 metric tons of spent reactor fuel, some of the most dangerous material known to humankind, is going, if this facility is licensed, is going to pass through and may be stored for as long as 120 years. That is what Holtec predicts in its license application. Beyond Nuclear and its members oppose the Holtec facility because it is illegal, and because it would pose exactly the type of dangerous environmental risk of an ad hoc, de facto, permanent waste dump on the surface of the earth that Congress wanted to avoid by passing the Nuclear Waste Policy Act in 1982. At that time, Congress heard from a range of geologists and radiation specialists who agreed unanimously there's only one way that spent reactor fuel, this very radioactive, high-level material that will be radioactive for a million years, can be safely protected from the environment and from impacting human health. That is to put it deep beneath the earth in a geologic repository. That means a place that has been studied for its ability to contain radioactive waste for eons. That is not what Holtec's proposing. And you may see in the newspaper that Holtec is going to bury this facility. That means that they're going to build it slightly below the level of the earth in order to protect it against terrorist attacks, because casts that sit above the ground are very vulnerable to attacks. And this is a good thing to put this facility, kind of berm up the earth around it, bury it a bit. But by no means is that the equivalent of a repository. That's something that is now being studied at one place, Yucca Mountain. Who knows if that will work? But you know the depth of the technical investigation and design that's needed for that. Congress in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act said, we are going to have to put this material in a repository. And really important for this case, Congress also passed a provision intended to short circuit, or intended to keep private utilities from short circuiting the repository program, because they knew it would take a long time and it would be difficult. So they said that the federal government will not take title to spent fuel unless and until a repository is operating. And that was essential to keep private companies from basically dumping spent fuel onto the government and walking away from it. Because once the government takes title to it, what is private industry going to do? They're going to make as much money as they can off of contracts with the government, but they will have no more liability for it. They will have no more incentive to work politically for a repository, and it's out of their hands. Holtec is now attempting exactly the end run that the Nuclear Waste Policy Act prohibited. As Holtec has told its investors, it will not go forward with this project unless the DOE has ownership of the spent fuel to be stored at the site. Holtec will only be a purveyor of storage casks and a manager of the site with no skin in the game, just hired to manage the site. If Holtec goes out of business, goes bankrupt, walks away, then the citizens of New Mexico are going to have on their hands a federal storage facility, euphemism for dump, that may be there for hundreds of years, above the surface of the ground, not a repository, with the political incentive to solve the problem of what to do with this material eliminated, because New Mexico will just have solved the problem for the whole country by taking the entire inventory of United States spent fuel, 173,000 metric tons. It's not even up to that yet. You will be getting all the spent fuel that's generated from now until the nuclear industry is gone. And the chances, we already know how difficult it is to get the Yucca Mountain repository license for many good reasons. The political will needed to solve this problem is something that the whole country needs to get behind. If you all basically step up and say, we'll take it in our above ground facility, I'm really afraid you're going to have it forever. You are basically going to have a shallow graveyard for the nation's nuclear waste. And that is why Beyond Nuclear is opposing this application. We are also in federal court opposing this application, and we believe we will succeed in persuading, if not the NRC, then a federal court, that this entire project is illegal. Thank you.
Okay, so next we will have our representative who has been taking the lead on the arguments for a coalition of 6 groups. Terry Lodge is coming from Toledo, Ohio, and he is our he is our representative also for the Nuclear Issues Study Group, a group that I'm a part of here in Albuquerque, and many of us here who have helped with the press conference. Terry Lodge is the attorney for 6 grassroots groups from New Mexico to California to Illinois, Michigan, New York, along with Public Citizen. So I'd like to welcome Terry to the stage to make his statement. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm an attorney in Toledo, and I've been practicing nearly 40 years, and I've been opposing nuclear power for longer than that. And it's oddly poetic or symmetrical or something to get involved in this fight at my age and stage, I guess. I'm honored to represent, among other people, Leona and a number of grassroots groups. The point that we are making in our part of the case is that there are many environmental problems that, along with the excellent summation you just heard from Diane Curran, that there are lots of environmental problems, there are lots of weeds that we can get into, but that the idea is absurd and ridiculous for some other reasons. One of them is there is a below-the-radar methodology in place right now for the management of spent nuclear fuel that is working pretty well, and is one of the points of pride of one branch of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They are storing waste at nuclear reactor sites, relatively uneventfully, not particularly expensively. And yet we have this unlawful proposal being advanced for no good purpose that actually is contradictory of the aims of existing federal law. This is a much larger proposal than is contemplated in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. And worse than that, Holtec doesn't even make a pretense of meeting some of the best practices kinds of standards that the industry and the regulatory agencies themselves have proposed. One of the central objections that the grassroots organizations I represent have is that there is no means of unloading, remediating, or dealing with canisters of spent nuclear fuel that would arrive on site at Holtec with external contamination, with cracking or other structural problems, with any kind of fuel misbehavior, such as broken fuel rods that are in contact with one another. The system that is proposed in a generic environmental impact statement that was the subject of litigation some years ago expects and presumes that a large facility of this sort would have a very expensive on-site capability to unload, reload, remediate, fix any problems that might occur. In documents that were just released about 8 or 9 days ago, it appears that the plan for Holtec is if a damaged cask or contaminated or leaking one shows up, it will be held indefinitely on a railroad siding at the site and what we call returned to sender. So this waste may have traveled from, say, the Maine Yankee all the way to southeastern New Mexico, and it will retrace that route. 95% of the spent fuel delivered to Holtec will come by rail. It will undoubtedly come on established rail routes, and it will go back if it is sent back. So you have a company that is saying, we want the DOE to take all of the responsibility, take any liability off of our backs, and we want to get paid very handsomely for storing it for 100 years, but we don't even intend to have adequate measures to protect our own workers, much less the public. It is the epitome to me of a public be damned kind of approach. Finally, I simply want to make the point that we're in the, I flew out of Detroit. I'll just put it this way. I got up at 2 this morning in northern Ohio, drove to Detroit, where I flew out of an airport in a jet that possibly hasn't been inspected in a timely and regular way, guided out of the very busy airspace over Detroit by an air traffic controller who I hope to hell was not getting calls from his or her spouse about a new bill collector that is robocalling us to death, who hasn't gotten a foreclosure notice, who isn't getting really angry and having to do double shifts, to come down to a hearing before a federal agency that is safely and securely funded by the industry it regulates. There's something very anomalous and troublesome here, and the implication also that is arising from what's going on right now is that shutdowns may become a more or less routine political tool. And it may be that they become longer and longer, shorter and shorter, who knows? Intermittent for sure. I don't think it will, the problem preceded the present administration, and it's probably going to become an icon in American political deal making. And I surely don't want to see something like a Holtec facility where the contractor can't call in staff because it's a contractor and there's no money. And we can't tell you how soon there will be. And oh yeah, those leaky canisters that arrived a month ago are just going to sit there, folks, until somebody pays the tab. So these are real world questions. What Diane was talking about is a very definitely troubling scenario, that the lottery is held. New Mexico says, sure, we want 55 jobs. Sure, bring it here, we have a nuclear triangle. But in effect, New Mexico solves everybody's political troubles in a Congress that's still getting paid today. Thank you. Yes. Whoa. Last Friday morning, I believe, the Sierra Club and the interveners I represent, we filed new proposed contentions. This is being unrolled for the media right now. We haven't done a press release on it. We filed a joint contention essentially calling for dismissal of the licensing case because in the course of presenting its version of how Holtec is to be financed, the Holtec amended, or at least, shall we say, they made an end of year 2018 public statement about the proposed operation and financing of the waste storage dump. And in it, in making their statements, they said, we are going to be very dependent on the decisions and determinations made by Congress and the U.S. Department of Energy. We believe that that is what's called in legal parlance as a material false statement. It contradicts several years worth of backtracking and inconsistent statements being made by Holtec and its corporate officers, both in official NRC filings as well as in finance calls and other public finance information. But you have a circumstance where a corporation is making false statements, making different statements depending on who the audience is. Different statements if the public is demanding that they come clean as to the fact that Holtec's going to be dug into our pockets for a long time. Different statements if they're possibly communicating information to possible investors. We think that this is a really serious problem. As Diane has pointed out, Beyond Nuclear has been advancing, is sort of in the vanguard of attacking the legality of the proceeding. We think that the legality of Holtec's behavior certainly has to be considered in that equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. I just want to acknowledge that there are two of our representing attorneys who are not here today, and they may be here if some of you are going to stick around to do interviews with any individuals. And that would be Nancy Simmons, who's the representative, the legal counsel for Alliance for Environmental Strategies, and Wally Taylor. He's representing the Sierra Club. And so today, I'm just going to wrap up as the final speaker. Again, my name is Leona Morgan, and I am with the Nuclear Issues Study Group. I'm also a co-founder of Diné No Nukes. The reason why I do this work is because I'm from Navajo Nation. My family is from the northwestern part of New Mexico and has been severely impacted from health effects that were caused by the uranium industry. And I started doing this work 10 years ago only to learn that it's not just uranium mining, it's the entire nuclear fuel chain that's affecting us in New Mexico. And the funny thing is, with Holtec, they're proposing to bring waste from a commercial nuclear power reactor, but we don't even have any in the state. So we're providing the resources to make fuel and power for other people who use that electricity, but they want to dump this waste back on us. And I'm not talking about everybody. I'll be honest, I do travel a lot, and I know some of these communities, they just want what's safe for their people. But there are people out there from these communities around reactors who don't want to send the waste here. I travel a lot. I've been to Southern California. I've seen San Onofre. I've been to the East Coast, the Pilgrim plant in Massachusetts. All of these places, we know that they do not want to send their waste here. And we know that Holtec is working with Northstar to try to buy these reactors and say they can decommission them quickly because they have a place to put the waste. Well, guess what? They're not going to have a place to put the waste because we're going to stop this. So I just want to reiterate, as an Indigenous person, we've been dealing with nuclear colonialism for a long time. And I want to repeat something that was said by Noel Marquez, that we are not separate from the environment. We are not here as environmentalists or just as activists and advocates. We're here as human beings. And what we do to the earth, we're going to do to not just ourselves, but more so our future generations. And we're not going to let that happen. Today, you heard from several speakers from the community, our legal representatives, all of us working together to say, we know this is not a safe proposal. This is not a good idea. Not only is it illegal, it's just not scientifically sound. And us in New Mexico, New Mexicans do not want this waste. So we're here today to say we are not a national sacrifice zone. No to Holtec. Halt Holtec. So, and with that, I just wanted to make one last point. Here in New Mexico, we're dealing with this as a local issue. Internationally, at the UN, I was at the recent COP24 meeting in Poland, and we know that Trump and other nations are pushing nuclear energy as a green source of power, and that this is a solution to climate change. So what happens if that continues? What does that mean for us if there's more waste created? We know that nuclear energy is not clean, it's not green, it's not renewable. And so there are several other issues that we can talk about. There are many connected issues with different parts of the nuclear fuel chain. We have many experts in the room, and I'd just like to invite the members of the press to take some time to speak with us. If you are a representative of an organization, would you please raise your hand so the press can recognize we have many experts in the room on various issues, not just the speakers here today. So we're going to conclude our press conference right now, but we will be here. We will be here to do questions and answers. Thank you, Diane. So right now, I will entertain some questions from the audience for any of the speakers. And after that, we will continue to stick around so you can do one-on-one interviews with anybody that you wanted to touch base with. So for maybe the next few minutes, I'd like to ask the members of the press if you have any questions. I know there's some people streaming online. I don't know if there's a message board, and maybe you can let us know if there's a question from some of our online viewers. Okay, so I don't see any members of the press with questions. Is there anyone from the audience that might have a question? Okay, so I'm just going to say thank you to everyone who came. For all of the members of the press, we have press packets for you. We have in the press packet a lot of information about what you heard today and contact information for all of our representatives, and even some examples of resolutions that were passed. I mentioned there were 19 that have been passed so far. Yes?
I'm Michael Keegan with Don't Waste Michigan, and I'm concerned about the transportation of this. If this is approved, this sets in motion a whole lot of a risk across the nation, and I'd like to hear a bit more about that this week.
Okay, I'm going to ask any of our speakers, would you like to take this on? Any of the speakers? Terry, would you come up here and just... So the question is about transportation risks, and I'm going to let Terry Lodge answer this question.
Approximately 218 million people live within 50 miles of one of the major highway or rail lines that would be delivering waste to New Mexico. 50 miles is an arbitrary, pick a number kind of distance that was selected by the U.S. Department of Energy in the Yucca Mountain case as representing a possible mega catastrophe kind of scenario where there would be windborne or waterborne radiation from a transportation accident. And the transportation risks are significant. As I indicated earlier, there's the return to sender problem where there might actually literally be questionable or marginal or even openly unsafe canisters being shipped back to the reactor sites from which they originated. There's also the additional problem that if there is ultimately a geological repository established somewhere, that all of this waste will be transported to New Mexico, and then it will be removed from New Mexico, presumably, after 100 or 120 years or longer, and it will travel the rails a second time. Part of the solution that is out there today of storing the material for a few score years until the repository issue is resolved is that you only move it once. And instead, we're talking about somebody making a great deal of money and moving it twice or more if it's returned to sender. And I just want to add, we're talking in the Yucca Mountain case, the state of Nevada calculated that approximately 70% of the waste will travel through the Chicago metropolitan area because most of it would be coming from the east heading for the southwest. So we're talking about, in Toledo, where I live, is on a major rail line between essentially New York City and New England and points west, Chicago and west. So we're talking about sort of a compounding effect. The closer you get to Holtec, the more trips are going past your city, through your town, even past your home or place of work. Oh yes, there is the additional mode of transport besides truck that on the Great Lakes, and possibly, didn't I see one example maybe down the California coast where some of the waste would be transported by barge, which is another unimaginable scenario. So.
Okay, one last question, and go ahead.
Are you sure? I understand the Holtec has had some problems with the canisters that they're using. And that one of those problems is that they have to be sealed, and when they're sealed, they can no longer check to see if there's been damage to the fuel rods inside. And I wondered, do you have any idea of what canisters Holtec is planning on bringing this place and using to bring this place to Maine?
Does anyone want to take this question about the TriStar canisters? Keegan.
Yes.
Keegan, come to the mic.
Michael Keegan with Don't Waste Michigan. I'm one of the interveners. Yes, Holtec has some faulty casks, the High Store 100, and they've loaded several of these at Vermont Yankee, and they can't unload them. They've loaded several at San Onofre. They can't unload them. And they know that they've damaged these casks while loading. They actually got a canister stuck in one, which it was dangling for a number of hours, 18 feet above the ground. So these are faulty casks. They've gone through numerous amendments, rubber stamped by the NRC, but here comes another revision. It seems like you get it, maybe the first, second try. They're on now amendment number 15 and looking to get exemptions to be able to essentially operate faulty cast systems. So and this is similar at other cast systems. So these are not a sound design. These are faulty and known to be faulty. Thank you.
Otra vez en español. Soy Noel Márquez de Orticia, Nuevo México. Me gusta mucho el pueblito de Lake Arthur porque ahí está todo el poder de una comunidad muy chiquita. Y me da mucho orgullo que ellos pasaron la primera resolución en el estado de Nuevo México que dijeron que nosotros no vamos a dejar pasar ningún veneno por nuestra comunidad. Y eso es muy grande, eran los primeros. Entonces, con eso en la mente, si hay preguntas en español después de la plática, quisiera hablar con ustedes y me pueden preguntar cosas en español. And in English, it just says, I have lots of love for the community of Lake Arthur. That is a community of 800 people that had the guts to be the first community to pass a resolution that says, no, we will not tolerate this poison on our citizens, and we can do better for the state of New Mexico. And because of that, I live in a rural area. We have a small farm. We plant pecans. I have a small business. I do community art, and we're all threatened. And so when they stand up for you, you appreciate good government. And so that's what we need to do is speak to our public officials and make sure they get the message and that they come out and do the responsible thing besides vote for the money. But thank you.
Okay, and thank you everyone for coming. I'd like to remind you all that the hearing will be here in this building right across the hall. The NRC Atomic Safety and Licensing Board hearing will start tomorrow at 9 a.m. We hope you will all come out to listen, and if you cannot come out in person, you can call in on the call-in line. Please ask us for the number if you don't have it. And that concludes our press conference for today for Holtec. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, members of the press and all of our watchers online. So don't forget your press packet on the way out. Okay.